mute, go on mute, all that type of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because we all have good microphones.
Yeah, exactly, which is great.
All right, ready? Let's do it. Elevation Nation, on this week's episode of the podcast, we have on, I asked Joe before what I could call him, and he said he was a performance coach and speaker. But I think, Joe, you really are a full-time inspirer now, which I absolutely love. And people are going to be inspired about your story, your mentality, and your mindset. We're so excited to have Joe Rinaldi on the Elevation Nation podcast. Thanks for joining us, brother. Happy Halloween, too, by the way.
Happy Halloween. No, I am extremely excited to be here. I think full-time inspirer is probably going to be my new go-to. So let's run with that. And yeah, I'm excited to get going here.
That's like a perfect Instagram bio, maybe, if you're really feeling it. Full-time inspirer. I love it. Joe, I was looking through all your website. I was reading your newsletter, all this type of stuff over the past week. And I came across, obviously, your Patreon page. And I scrolled down and I look at that video, hit play, on the page. I was just like, let's go. I am pumped for this conversation. This is going to be awesome. I was fired up from the the video. So I am sure, and maybe Elevation Nation, you can't tell from my excitement. Hope you're fired up too. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, that video. So I made that video. It's a 2-minute kind of motivational video that you're talking about with a buddy of mine who I played football with in college. He made me look really good. I wrote the script. And I worked out, but he did all the editing, made it look great. And yeah, I feel like full-time inspirer, the more that I think about it, is probably what I'm going for. And the avenues through which I do that are coaching, writing, and speaking. But my big thing, as you guys both know, is that I'm losing my sight. And I could explain way more about this if it feels right. But what I've lost in sight, I've gained in vision. And I truly see it as a blessing. And that confuses most people.
No, that's perfect, Joe. And you read our minds in terms of diving into the first kind of part of the podcast, which is your elevator pitch, right? Who are you? Obviously, we know you're now a full-time inspirer, and maybe you always were in your heart, but that wasn't always your career. Can you give us your kind of quick elevator pitch of, who you were and who you are now?
Sure. So when I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with a condition called Best disease. It's a genetic eye condition that causes progressive loss of eyesight. There are treatments to help slow the progression, but there's no cure. So for the first 17 years, or rather the first, I'd say 20 years of the condition, which was the first 20 years of my life, it affected me in a negative way. It drained my confidence. I felt different than everybody else, and I felt like I was at a disadvantage. After the 20-year mark, things actually began to get worse. I fell into a dark season of life. I transferred from Bucknell University to Rutgers University to study exercise science, lived at home. Life was okay, and I decided to pursue a degree in physical therapy. That first year of physical therapy school was the hardest, darkest season of my life. And right at the end of that season, I met a girl who is now my wife. And when I realized she was the person I wanted to marry, my life absolutely changed. I realized that life was bigger than me. And I realized that feeling sorry for myself, feeling like I was at a disadvantage, none of those things were useful to me, to my wife, or to any of the other people in my life. So at an instant, everything flipped, and that burden, which was my loss of eyesight, became a blessing. It's allowed me to have incredible perspective, and I truly feel like I'm a much better person for it. And my goal is to inspire people to find strength in their struggle, because there truly is no strength without struggle.
Elevation Nation, we are 4 minutes into this episode, but I'm sure that and I know Sam knows, sitting across the virtual environment than me, Joe exudes mental fortitude. And Joe, that is what we're going to be talking about today, the concept of mental fortitude, the concept that Sam and I have been researching, talking about, putting into people's brains the last 20 months. And that's, of course, what the Elevation Nation podcast is all about. So the way we're going to talk about mental fortitude is through the 3 principles that Sam and I believe people need to focus on to gain mental fortitude. And that is self-awareness, vision, and accountability. So it's going to be a fun conversation. Let's start with self-awareness. This first question honestly stumps a few people, but it's not that difficult.
Throw it at me. I'm ready.
What one word best describes you?
Resilient.
Not much of a stump there. That was good. Way to just answer right away. Some people, it's hard, one word to describe you. Humans are complex. We all have so many different layers. But I think, and this is a shout out to Rich Keller, who is a huge mentor of ours, and Joe, someone we're going to have to introduce you to. But he has an entire program that is the foundation of who Parker and I are, but also what kind of sparked Elevation Nation, his one-word program, We Were Elevators. So that's kind of the story of why we asked this one word. But, Joe, I'd love for you to expand a little bit more on yours and what life event, I can kind of foreshadow a bit, but what life event kind of made you pick that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think before I get to the life event, it's important for the listeners to know that I'm a very active person and fitness is a big part of my life. I found the weight room when I was 13 years old and currently 27. So for the past 14 years, it's been a staple in my daily routine and it's a big part of who I am. And the reason I love fitness is because just like life, fitness is hard. And you go into a place, whether it's a gym or maybe you go to a track or somewhere else, and you physically, intentionally push yourself so that your body can adapt and get stronger, become more resilient. Life is essentially a free gym membership, but we just don't have a choice, right? We're all in the gym, right? We all live life. It gets hard. It's unfair. We can't predict what's going to happen, but just like we can lift weights and our muscles can get stronger, in life, when hard things happen, we could either fall and crumble under that pressure, or we can elevate, Elevation Nation, elevate, and become stronger. We can adapt. We can become resilient. And so to me, I dealt with the stress, if you want to call it, of losing my eyesight from 10 years old to about 23, 24, I would say. That period was where it really affected me, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And it was a net negative in my life. And after 23, 24, when I met my wife, when I realized I wanted her to be my wife, things began to flip. And the stress in my life, my loss of eyesight, was no different. But it was my perspective that changed. And my perspective made all the difference. And to me, I think that event in my life of meeting my wife truly is what defines this current season of life for me. And that's, life is bigger than me. And so when I think about the burden that I've been blessed with, it's a weird sentence, but that loss of eyesight, I feel obligated to live a life that just exudes resilience, because there are people who are watching me. There are people who are interacting with me, and everybody, both near and far, is going to be affected by how I handle these circumstances. So I feel like I have this incredible opportunity to live a resilient life, so to show other people that they can do the same.
Joe, I'm curious, I would love for you to talk a little bit more and elaborate more on what life was like for you before you made that switch in your head. So that elevation, honestly, myself too, to get more context, and I'm really interested.
That's a great question. That's a really great question. I think if I were to go back to my childhood, baseball is my first love. It was the sport my dad grew up playing. He was very involved with the sport. He coached me from a young age. My younger brother played baseball all the way through college. I had to stop, though, when I was a teenager, when I was about 12, 13, 14, with poor eyesight. Baseball is probably not the best fit. I started getting hit in the face with a couple of baseballs and finally made the decision to give that up and transition to football. And so, for example, when I had to give up baseball, I fell into this cycle of self-pity. I saw all of my friends continue to play baseball. My dad was still coaching my younger brother. I felt like their relationship was different than my relationship with my dad because we no longer had that intimate baseball connection. And so I just resorted to self-pity. Self-pity was just the go-to for me. When I was in school and I was told by my parents, you need to sit in the front of the room, you need to ask for bigger print, you need to ask for extra time on tests, I would say, yep, okay, I'll do it. I would go to school and I would sit in the back of the room. I would not ask for anything different. I would do regular time on tests because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to advocate for myself. I just wanted to be normal like everybody else. And as life progressed, I realized that one, nobody's normal. Everybody's got that thing. Everybody's a little quirky. Everybody's different. And that's what makes the world go round. But two, you do have to embrace the thing that makes you different or the things that make you different. And so I started to do that through high school and college. I stopped hiding what I was dealing with. I would tell people about it. I would wear glasses that didn't really help too much, but they made a little bit of difference. And I stopped caring what other people thought. But at the same time, I still felt very different. So what that meant for me was I felt like, all right, I'm going to go to class in college. Everybody else is going to go home, study for a little bit, and then party. I felt like I had to go to the library and outstudy every single other person because I was at a disadvantage. So while I still felt disadvantaged, I, instead of feeling sorry for myself, started to flip it and started to actually take control of what I could control. So I guess the underlying theme throughout all of my childhood and teenage years was that I felt different. And in the beginning, I was trying to hide it. And near the end, I was embracing it and actually changing the way I acted because of it.
I love how you kind of turned all of that on its head towards the end. And something I want to highlight is it's hard to be self-aware as a grown adult, like all three of us, let alone a kid, right? To understand who you are and that you're different. Sure, that's one thing. But to spin it into a positive, that's really, really tough. And when we all were growing up, I know it was like social media was just starting, but there weren't probably a lot of inspirations or people you could look to and turn to that would say, embrace this, difference and turn it into a blessing like you're doing now, Joe. And one thing that I think is amazing, and it will be the first to admit I don't love everything about social media, but one thing that is fantastic about it is you're now able to inspire all those people that are also going through hardships at a younger age or maybe struggling with their self-awareness and how to turn it into a positive. You now are that full-time inspirer for them. So on behalf of everybody, and myself included, thank you for doing that because it's hard. It's hard when you don't see anybody else going through hardships and you see all these perfect lives that people are living and you're comparing yourself to them, especially as a kid and even now. So I think that's really special, Joe. That's awesome, man.
I appreciate that a lot. And I will say, one of the people who changed the way that I viewed my condition was Inky Johnson. I don't know if either of you are familiar.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So he's a motivational speaker. He's just an absolute inspiration. And, not to dig too far into his story, but what really inspired me about him was that he took on this attitude of so many people could lose everything that he lost and say, why me? And he had those emotions, but he also said, why not me? And he decided to use that burden he had been given as a blessing for both him, but also everybody else in the world that would come across him. And what I think is important to highlight is that there might be people listening that don't have a huge social media following, that don't feel comfortable sharing their story and their struggle and being vulnerable. But I think we can all better impact people around us by handling our struggle well, both in public, but also in private. And so what that might mean is, if you are physically tired every day and you don't want to go to the gym and you just brush it off and make the excuse and don't go, you might think to yourself, this is only negatively affecting me. But the habits that we create for ourselves become who we are. And so every decision that we make, both big and small, in public and in private, is in turn shaping us into the person who we will be tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So those small decisions in private are actually going to impact every single person that we ever interact with. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is making the right decision, even when it's small and even when nobody else sees it, because it's those decisions that end up having a big difference.
Joe, I'm curious from your perspective. Sam and I talk about self-awareness a lot, and we have written exercises about becoming more self-aware. We've implemented those exercises in both of our lives. I think the podcast is a great form of self-awareness exercises that Sam and I do. When you talk to people you work with or people you're just inspiring or even yourself, how do you help them become more self-aware?
That's such a great question. I mean, obviously there are techniques when it comes to coaching, but I think probably the most profound way that I have experienced in my own life to build self-awareness has been journaling. I personally love to write, and I will sit down for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes in the morning and just write. And it's interesting because my podcast co-host and I both share that same practice, and we talk about it quite often. And it's funny how both of our journals end up following a similar structure. And it's, like yesterday was good and bad and whatever. I'm doubting myself in this area, X, Y, and Z. And then you start just talking through it and writing through it. And by the end, you're kind of like pumping yourself up and you're ready to take on the world. And it's just so fascinating to me how we can have so many thoughts floating around in our minds and they stay really complicated and ambiguous and just elusive sometimes. But when we put them down on paper and we start to write or we start to express ourselves, even if it's just through talking and having a conversation, we can begin to organize those thoughts, make sense of everything. And 99 times out of 100, I feel way better and way more in tune with what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling when I journal.
There's so much that goes through in our head on a daily basis, whether it's good, bad, neutral, whatever it is. And the best thing about journaling, and I do a little bit of it as well, is when you write it down, it becomes real. It's like, dang, it's there, it's physical. I took, obviously if we're going to get into the nitty gritty, like literally my hand wrote it, all of that. You took effort to put that on a piece of paper. Okay, and then from that point, you get to read it. Be like, damn, okay, I'm feeling this way. You're becoming vulnerable with yourself, which is allowing you to open up like, wow, okay, my life doesn't always need to be amazing. It's about acknowledging those times too and being self-aware when times are not going well, or maybe you're upset with something, reading it, making it real, and then crafting how you're going to move forward with that.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And the other thing too that's great about journaling and or documenting your thoughts in some way is that you can go back, you can look back, and you can recognize patterns and say, I felt this way like 10 dozen times in the past year, and every single time it's followed this pattern, and I do this and I do this and I feel better about it. So maybe I can make a change, or I know this is going to pass and get better. So I think that's really important to note about journaling, but also that it's an extremely difficult practice, especially when you're new to it,
But it's also fun. I mean, like I love looking back, like when you read, there's nothing better than looking back at old pictures of yourself and nothing better than looking at old videos of yourself. But that's all like external, someone taking a picture of you, you're taking a picture of yourself. Like when you're journaling, that's your thoughts and only you has seen that. It's freaking cool too, reading back on some of the ideas and things you're going through, and you look where you are now compared to where you were then.
Yeah.
So on a last note here on self-awareness, I think, again, Joe, huge inspiration for people. If anyone out there is struggling with something, going through hardships, I know you make this blanket statement on your website, so I think it's fair for me to throw this out there, but you can reach out to Joe. You can reach out to Parker and myself. Both of us have just free calls. Like there's no point behind it besides us wanting to mentor and help other people. So we'll link to Joe's got a phone number in here that you can text to reach out to him and schedule time. So we'll link to that as well. And on our page, we also have scheduling abilities. Just sometimes you need someone to talk to. Sometimes you just need an unbiased third party to listen. And everybody's going through hardships. Everybody has hard times. And if you feel like no one is here to listen to you, there are 3 people right here on this podcast that are telling you we're here to listen. So please use that. We'd love to help some people. And again, try to just make this world a little bit of a happier, healthier, and better place. So that's awesome with self-awareness. I want to transition now into the next part of mental fortitude here, Joe, which is vision, which I understand is obviously a bit of a ironic term here for our conversation, but I think vision and how Parker and I use it with mental fortitude is really powerful in terms of we all have these lives that we really are, seeing in the future for ourselves that we want to make come true. But sometimes it's hard to even contemplate what that life in the future could be like because you're so stuck in a rut or stuck in the everyday. So I'm curious, what do you kind of have as the vision for you as a full-time inspirer over the next few years?
Such a great question, and it's interesting because to me, vision is the word I used to use to describe my loss of sight. But now I do my very best, and I still trip up sometimes to make sure that I'm saying I'm losing sight. Because to me, sight is what you see with your eyes open. Vision is what you see with your eyes closed. Exactly like you both are describing it, right? And so to me, sight is limited for everybody. Nobody can look out and see 20 miles down the road physically. But when you close your eyes, it's limitless. You can see anything that you want to see. You can imagine possibilities. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the word vision and the concept. So to answer your question directly, when I look down the road, I can see certain things, right? I can see that I want to be speaking on a regular basis to groups of people and inspiring, sharing my story and helping them through that avenue. I can see that I want to have published a solo book. I have currently a co-authored book that's coming out here in a couple months, but I want to write a solo book. Thank you. And I want to write maybe more books down the road. In terms of coaching, I want to grow that practice. I want to offer group coaching, which is more of a near-term project. And I want to grow my one-on-one coaching and potentially bring on some other coaches to help me with that. But when I think really, really, really long-term, I know two things for sure. I want to be a great husband and a great father. And then the rest of it is more a feeling at this point. And I think that is valuable. And obviously it's a little bit ambiguous, but I want to feel fulfilled. I want to have freedom, and I want to have impact. And I'm not sure exactly what it looks like. Maybe I am just speaking and I drop the writing, or maybe I'm doing all writing and I drop the speaking, or maybe I'm a barista at my own coffee shop and just, serving people smiles every single day. I don't know, but I know the feeling. So yeah, more near term, speaking, writing, coaching, growing all of that, but long term, father, husband, and just having an impact.
I gotta pause here and just say, Joe, how much that resonates with me. So throwing it back real quick, I did a vision exercise a few months ago where I wrote down my ideal day in 30-minute increments, my perfect day, my ideal day of what I want to have happen to me in the next however many years. And I struggled with what activities they were. I was like, I don't really know exactly what I really want to do, but I know how I want to feel. And I love that you said that, because I'm very similar to, I want to feel fulfilled, want to feel like I'm helping make the world and people a better place, right? I want to feel success. I want to feel happiness. All these feelings, but I don't even know what I want to eat for dinner, let alone what I want to be doing in 10 years to help get me to those feelings, right? And that's why I love how you just highlighted, if you're a barista and that's what's bringing you those feelings, then that's it, right? And I think more and more people are chasing after that feeling as opposed to that title or that position, which I think is an awesome testament to our society hopefully maturing in a different way, right? I think before it was all about climbing the corporate ladder, and hopefully now we're shining a light on you can do other things besides climb a corporate ladder, or maybe that is what you want to do, right? To find those feelings. So I love that. I wanted to highlight that because that was awesome.
It's funny because the middle, it's the difference between the physical things and the intangible things, man. It's like, it's like in the future, the way I want to live my life is rooted in my principles and my values and the way that I feel, off your point, Sam and Joe, as a result of certain things that physically happen on a day-to-day. The crazy thing is we can't control a lot of the physical things that happen on a day-to-day. However, I do believe you can control the environment of which those physical things can come about. And I think when it comes to vision, like the environment, Sam, we haven't really talked about this much, I feel like, at all. The environment, the impact of that is so important. Joe, what are you thinking on this? I'm curious. Hopefully you got some wheels churning in your brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. What I'll say first is to your point about the physical aspect of vision or physical aspect of our days or our lives. Yeah, there's so much we can't control. And that's why goals are great. But I think when we become attached to outcomes, it's dangerous. And so for me, vision is more of a process oriented exercise. And I'm thinking about things that I can control and how I want to feel about those things and how I want to accomplish those things. Not so much accomplishing specific physical or objective goals that may or may not be in my control. So that's one. Two, yeah, I agree with you. Environment is so important. And environment, without a doubt, impacts us all, from the content we consume to the physical space that we're in to the people we're around. And I think most people know that, but some people throw their hands up when they're in a bad environment and say, these are cards I'm dealt. But I think at the same time, while we can't control how our environment influences us, we can always and entirely control how we place ourselves in an environment. And maybe that means unfollowing certain accounts on social media that aren't serving us. Or maybe it means, spending less time with that person who's going out and getting hammered 5 nights a week and doesn't fit into the vision we have for our lives. Or maybe it's physically moving apartments or houses to a different location where you're around more green space or you're closer to your place of work so your commute is less. There are all these things that we can control. So I think the takeaway is, yes, environment impacts us all, and we can't change that, but we can change our environments. And I think that's a really underrated point that most people overlook.
Especially as a young adult. I feel like as a young adult, you're kind of on that route, and you think you want to go one way, and the environment of which you do that is just kind of how it comes, and sometimes you don't get to really choose what it's like. But what's great about being a young adult is that you have the freedom to go where you want. And it's like that mindset shift that you need to have, like, damn, I have that freedom to create the life I want to live, to create the environment I want to live in, rather than going and reverting to what living in an environment that everyone else wants to live in, but maybe it's not right for me. It takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And I think if people are listening and they think, wow, I have to make this big change, like I have to move houses, I have to change my friend group, I have to, do all this stuff. There's this great book called The Defining Decade, and it's about our 20s. But in the beginning of the book, they use this analogy, and it's about a plane. And they say if a plane is leaving from New York City going west, a small adjustment in the beginning is the difference between going to Arizona and going to Washington State. And the further along that you get on that plane ride, to make a big change or to make a change in destination requires a bigger change.
Totally.
But in the beginning, the people listening to this podcast, you guys, me, in our 20s, maybe younger or maybe a little bit older, we're in the beginning of that journey. So small changes go a long way when you compound them over time. So if anybody's feeling overwhelmed about making a change, my advice would just be to start small and be consistent, continue to get clear on who you want to be and where you want to go, and continue to make changes over time in accordance with that person.
And when we're talking small, like, you know what? If to really get started, like, you don't like Starbucks coffee, but you seem to drop $4.50 on coffee every morning because it's the closest coffee shop, you can make that change and go to the Dunkin' Donuts and save a little money there if it's, a quarter of a mile further. But that's small, Joe. That's small.
I'm not a big Dunkin' fan, but I agree with the thought
yeah,
process.
I agree. I am not a Dunkin' guy. Starbucks, it's fine. I usually go to like local coffee shops in the city. I live in New York City. Just like pick up random coffee. Some of it's absolute shit. Others is like amazing. And just like, all right, this is fun.
Oh my gosh. All right. On the tangent of coffee, I love that plane analogy though, Joe, but I'm not going to lie. It freaks me out a little bit. It scares me. As a young person and someone who I think is pretty introspective and looking towards his future, I'm so scared that maybe having this podcast isn't the right move for me. Maybe I should be in culinary school. Maybe I should be traveling the world. Maybe I should go start my own coffee shop so Parker doesn't need to drink shit coffee in New York anymore. Right? Like what? That's what's so crazy about being a young adult. And I think not the disservice that happens when we grow up in a bubble or in our comfort zone, but there were career paths that were normal from the town I grew up in. There were colleges that were normal to go to. There were cities that were normal to move to post-grad. And that was comfortable. That was easy. And yes, as a young adult, I think there's no better time to make a big change. But I also think it's very, very difficult for young people to step outside of their comfort zone and make that change that's bold, that's different, that their friends aren't doing, because it's easy to be comfortable. It feels a lot better. Let's get into comfort zone, Joe, because I know that's a passion for you that you write about a bit as well.
So I love that you brought that up. And I just recorded a podcast with a friend of mine. His name's Tony Reyes. He was 406 pounds about 2 years ago, and he's lost over 150 pounds. He ran a marathon, super inspirational guy. And I love quotes. And I was so surprised when he told me this quote, and I had never heard it before. But the quote is simple, and I believe it's credited to nobody, so it's just unknown. Comfort is a slow death. And when he said that to me, I sat back in my chair just like you, Sam. And I was like, wow, that is, man. And I have it on an index card right next to my desk right now, because maybe one day it'll be a tattoo. Who knows? It's just, I don't know, right? I think people think of what would be the best life. And a lot of people's minds immediately go to a life without struggle, without pain, without hardship, sitting on a couch, eating potato chips, watching their favorite show, someone waiting on them hand and foot. But just like a person who never faces physical resistance, right? Our bodies become frail, the opposite of resilient. The same thing happens when life is easy and we coast, right? We can, for lack of a better term, become soft. And I think one of the things I've noticed throughout my life is I feel most alive when life is really hard or challenging, right? Hard doesn't have to be tied to bad. I think hard can happen with darkness, right? But hard could also happen when life is good and it's challenging and you're putting in the work and you're trying to figure things out. Maybe it's a little bit confusing and you're in that gray space. But I think life is the best for me, and I'm speaking from my experience, when there's a challenge. And maybe that's a physical challenge, like running a race or lifting in the gym. Maybe that's an emotional challenge, like deciding to leave my full-time job and pursue this path of speaking and writing and coaching, as opposed to being a doctor of physical therapy, which I went to 3 years of graduate school for. And in less time than I was in school, 2.5 years after school, I left that job and more or less exited that profession. That was an emotional and spiritual challenge, to be honest, but I grew a lot through it, right? And so I think for me, comfort is great for short periods of time when you feel like you need it. But seeking discomfort on a daily basis and going after hard things and putting yourself in positions where, there's going to be a little bit of a struggle, that's when we grow the most. That's when we learn the most. And honestly, that's when we're the most alive.
Damn right. That's where elevation fully comes, is when you're having the mental fortitude to push yourself outside the comfort zone. The comfort zone is really, really easy to fall into. It really is. It's nice. It's nice and cozy. You got that Starbucks coffee hanging out right there.
Parker's got his footsie pajamas on.
Yeah,
it feels good.
Fireplace, works a breeze. You're making a little money. Everything's fine. But it's so interesting. It's like when you put yourself and you strive to go outside your comfort zone, I've always found that agree with you. That's where I come alive too. Mm-hmm. But it's the first step. It's hard to get yourself to push outside the comfort zone. It's difficult. But I've always found the times that I do, I always look back and okay, how bad was that? If anything, there's a lot more positives that came from that than not. So I agree with you, Joe.
I got a controversial question for you, Joe, that I'm curious your thoughts on. Do you think that everybody at their core, if they push themselves outside their comfort zone and started to grind, make themselves hard, work, they would feel that coming alive that us three do as, people who love elevating and mental fortitude? Or do you think there's part of society that they don't have that same mindset, they don't have that same mentality, and actually just coasting and being comfortable is better for them? And the reason I ask this is when Parker and I first created Elevation Nation, we were trying to figure out who this was for, we struggled with that a lot. Is this inherent in human beings to push themselves to grow, to evolve, and adapt? Or is part of society just wanting to be comfortable, safe, secure, and feel whole without having to be nervous, right? Because when you think about how humans have kind of grown over the years, we've made technology and tools to help us be more safe, be more secure, and be more comfortable. But then we always seem to find ways to try to push the envelope a little bit further. So I don't know. I think it's just an interesting thing to think about.
That's a really great question.
Point.
I think every human being has the capacity to come alive during times of hardship or challenge or struggle. And I think you alluded to it. It depends on our perspective and our mindset and our beliefs. So to directly answer your question, yeah, I think right now there's probably billions of people in the world who are way happier just living a comfortable, stagnant, for lack of a better term, life. But there's also a big subset of people, the people who are doing Ironmans, the people who are running races, the people who are working long hours, pursuing difficult degrees, working, doing side hustles, creating a podcast like this, right? There are people who like challenge. There are people who like discomfort. There are people who do come alive in those moments. So I think everybody has the capacity. I don't think everybody right now in the world has that perspective or mindset. But again, that's all malleable. That can be changed. And it all comes back to environment, right? If you grew up in a household surrounded by people in a community, in a town where the norm was just be comfortable, maintain the status quo, you run the family business, and then someday you retire for a couple of years and you die, right? That's probably what you know, and that's probably what you want. But if you grew up in an environment where now you're listening to this podcast, you're friends with Parker and Sam, right? Maybe you know me, maybe you have another friend or two or a parent who has really pushed the envelope, become an entrepreneur, done something crazy, then that seed is planted and you begin to think, well, like, hey, maybe I should try some hard stuff. Maybe I should do this. And I think one of the big barriers for that is people think, well, that's kind of crazy. Nobody else is doing that. What are people going to think of me, right? You go to start an endeavor like a podcast when nobody else in your world is doing that. Everybody's just getting a corporate job and just living that life. But I think Friedrich Nietzsche said it the best. He said, those who dance are considered insane by those who can't hear the music. And I think, right? And I think the three of us on this podcast and hopefully people listening, they have music, right? They have music in their heads and their hearts. And that's why they want to be different. And they have to continue listening to that song and dancing, even if people from the outside are looking and thinking, what is that person doing? Have you ever seen a homeless person on the street just doing their own thing, having a grand old time in the middle of the street in New York City? And maybe they have this music in their head and their heart. We just can't see it. We can't hear it. And we look at them and we say, they're nuts. But people are looking at us the same way. And I think that's a really powerful concept.
I think a really big piece with like elevating your life and, we're talking here about pushing yourself outside your comfort zone to reach lofty goals that you necessarily wouldn't think you could do is there's also a lot of people who are on that mission to reach hefty goals. And they're pushing themselves outside their comfort zone, but they're not fulfilled by it when they reach those goals. They're not fulfilled by the life outside the comfort zone. I listened to a podcast earlier today on the Tim Ferriss show with Naval Ravikant and Chris Dixon. The whole thing was about cryptocurrency and NFTs, and I learned a ton. It was great. But what they were talking about is there's a lot of people, especially there's a lot of people in general who are just running up the wrong hill. They're putting themselves and pushing themselves outside their comfort zone just on the wrong path. And that's where the fulfillment is missing. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to change that hill up. And you can still push and vision. Yes, of course.
You gotta see to the top of that hill, right? You got to make sure you're running to the right one.
Exactly. It's interesting. And that's also, I think, a pursuit of elevating yourself. It's finding where you want to spend that extra time, where you want to exude that extra energy, and quit wasting time in BS things that don't matter to you. Like, seriously.
It's true.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say just one more piece on fulfillment. I think that's such an under-discussed topic that is so, so important. And just briefly on fulfillment, I think fulfillment and happiness are similar, but fulfillment always has to do with other people and how we're impacting other people, connecting with other people, and relating to other people. So for me, right, that was one of the big reasons I changed career paths, because I felt like I could make a bigger impact, make more meaningful and more just volume of connections, and make a bigger difference in the world and feel more fulfilled as a result.
So let's try to give you a little bit of that fulfillment right now, Joe. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a lot of people listening to the Elevation Nation podcast right now. So Elevation Nation, I know you're out there and you're thinking, dang, Joe, he's super inspiring. I love it. I'm going to be self-aware. I now got my vision, but how do I do it, right? And that brings us to our third part, which is accountability. And as a performance coach, Joe, how do you help kind of just shape that future to just get started, right? People know who they are, sure. Now they have their vision, they're ready to go, but it's like, how do I even start, man? How do I hold myself accountable? This is a daunting, overwhelming task. Where can I begin?
It's another great question. And it's interesting to me because when I first set out on the coaching journey about 3.5 years ago, while I was still practicing as a physical therapist and even a student at the tail end there, I thought that people were going to come to me because they needed guidance. They needed technical knowledge as to how to work out in the gym and what to do and how to improve their lives. And 9 times out of 10, people come to me with, they're very well equipped. They know how to work out. They maybe even know how to program. I have fitness coaches who are getting fitness coaching from me. And 9 times out of 10, there's a huge accountability component. And I think the best example from my life as to how I went from having external accountability to internal accountability happened when I stopped playing football in college. So for anybody listening who's played football, you know what a film session is. You watch back game film, or maybe even if you're at a higher level, like in college, you're watching practice film. So I would go into the film room. You knew you made a mistake the day before, and it's up on the big screen for everybody to see. And you're just waiting for that moment where the coach is just going to rip you apart in front of your teammates and coaches. That it feels terrible. But what I realized over time was that having my play put up on film for everybody else to see, it held me accountable. It forced me to take ownership. It made me a better football player. It made me a better teammate, and it made me a better person. And so when football was choked on my own water or saliva. I don't know, man. Cut that out, leave it in if the people want to laugh. I don't know. But
I was going to say, you're inspired yourself so much, you're getting choked up. Go ahead.
But so right when I left and I stopped playing football, I wanted to figure out a way where I could have that same level of accountability, because now instead of coaches and teammates seeing your play on film, it's just you, right? There's nobody that's going to call you out on your crap if you're not doing the right thing or you're not putting in the work you need to. And so it's you versus you. And so I did a lot of soul searching. I did a lot of digging, and I came across a lot of John Wooden's content. And John Wooden has this great quote, and I'm going to paraphrase. He said, "Care more about your character than your reputation, because your reputation is merely what others think you are, while your character is what you really are. The true test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching." And for me, I automatically, this guilt inside of me just bubbled up to the top. And I thought about all of the different times that I had fallen short in private and how that was my character. That was my integrity. And for me, since that point, right after college football, my life has been about trying to match my actions with my words in private and in public when everybody else can see me and when nobody else knows about it. And the important thing about accountability for me is that it comes back to the fact that life's bigger than me. And I understand that every single action that I take, whether it's waking up early, taking a cold shower, doing a hard workout, whatever it is, I am shaping who I become the next day and the next day and the next day. And that person is going to be a good husband or a bad husband, a good father someday or a bad father, a good friend or a bad friend. And every single decision I'm making, I'm essentially voting for the type of person that I want to be. And so even when nobody else sees it, I feel like I have to hold myself accountable, because someday everybody else is going to be impacted by it.
This concept of external and internal accountability is one I want to hit on again really quick, Joe, because that was fantastic and a ton of knowledge in there. And thank you for the Wooden quote. Always down with some coach quotes. He's amazing. So this external and internal accountability. Throughout our lives, we are told what to do next. Whether you're playing youth sports, whether you're in high school, whether you're in college, they tell you what classes to take, when to study, when your tests are, when you have homework, what the next part of your life is going to look like. And this is why Parker and I struggled so much and why we created Elevation Nation, is to help young people with their transition from college to the real world, because all of a sudden that external accountability is gone. That GPS of life that's telling you to turn left, turn right, or go straight shuts off. And all of a sudden you're left with a compass in your hand, a map, and a hiking stick, and you have no one telling you where to go anymore, and it's on you. And that shift from external accountability to internal accountability does not happen automatically. And that's where I think so many young people struggle, is we all have the ability, the eagerness, and the willingness to go out there and make a name and impact on the world. But for 22 years of our lives, someone told us how. And all of a sudden, we graduate, get a piece of paper, walk across a stage, and nobody's telling us what to do. And that's scary. And so hopefully Elevation Nation and this conversation with Joe can help you find that GPS again, but this time it's not someone else, it's in your own head.
Yeah, and just to tie it all back together, I think I can do this, but the thought is still forming, so bear with me. You're right. I think it starts with self-awareness, and you have to understand who you are, where you're at, what you're feeling, what you need. You need vision. You need clarity of vision, and whether that's a specific as to I want to be here in 5 years, or maybe it's a feeling, I want to feel like this. And then you have to start taking action and have both internal accountability, but also ask for help. Put yourself in the right environment. Find friends or people in your life who you can trust, who you want to be like, who are going to tell you how it is, and have them hold you accountable as well. And I think one of the best things for me about marriage is that you have that built-in accountability partner. And it's that person that knows, for 99% of the time, did you do the dishes? Did you do the right thing? Did you, whatever it was, right? But if you're not married or you don't have that person, go find those people. And even if you don't have an intimate one-on-one friendship with those people, just surround yourself with people like Parker, like Sam, maybe like me, or like somebody else that you aspire to be like, and just use them as a compass, as accountability in whatever way that they're willing to give it. And just make sure that you're moving in the direction that you want to be in, not where other people want you to be.
Listen, if you want to talk and hang out, like seriously, Sam and I will, we'll help you figure out the self-awareness and vision piece, but we'll hold you freaking accountable if you want us to. I can guarantee you that. Joe, I love the way you just pieced mental fortitude together. Mental fortitude is the thing that Sam and I believe young adults need, or I think everyone needs in some capacity, to elevate their lives. I just think young adults need it just a little bit more. Granted, the transition from college, childhood into adulthood. Before we get into our last few questions here, Sam and I, we started this new segment, all rapid fire questions, and we wanted to ask you, and hope Elevation Nation likes these questions too. Some quick rapid fire questions. So, are you ready?
I am ready. Bring it on.
Let's do it. Ooh, I like this one. Okay. What is your go-to workout song? But it's a two-part question. One in the gym and one when you're literally outside running around or doing whatever. There's got to be two different songs.
In the gym is Break My Baby by Kaleo, which I don't think most people have heard of. Go check it out. And running around outside, I'm going to say Big Papa by the Notorious B.I.G. and just can't beat it.
I mean, when I play that and I'm running, I literally am screaming I love the way you call me Big Papa. Literally hands are in the air. I'm training for a marathon right now, Joe, and like I literally have just gotten to the point where the runs have become so long that I'm like dancing and singing like out loud, so to entertain myself while the runs are going on. So if you're on,
So Elevation Nation, if you're on the West Side Highway and you see a crazy dude that looks like Parker saying, "I love the when you come," just go up to him and just say, "Keep going, Parker. You're almost
and
there."
I'll
'cause
thank
he needs
you
some
for listening
encouragement.
to the Elevation Nation podcast, and that'll be that.
Love it. All right, another rapid fire for you, Joe. What is the best book you've ever read?
Wow.
Yeah, it's tough.
Everybody Always by Bob Goff. I have about 200 books on my bookshelf, but I think that one takes the cake, still at number one. And really just brief summary, it's about how to love everybody always, even the difficult ones. So it's a good read.
I love that. I like when I have a book recommendation from this segment that I haven't read before. Parker and I also love to read, as you can see above us in our bookshelves in our room. So I love that. That's awesome.
And lastly, I'm curious too, and Elevation Nation is curious. Who is the person you can always call when you need something? Sorry.
Does my wife count, or should I pick somebody different?
So it's definitely your wife.
I think that's
Well,
a good answer. Make sure you don't get in trouble, Joe.
We're acknowledging that. What about another person?
So I got a buddy from home, Alex McHugh. Grew up with him, played sports with him. Great friend from high school. And he's the kind of friend where you can kind of not talk to each other for 6 months, hop on a phone call or see each other in person, and it's like you didn't skip a beat.
Those are special friends. Shout out, Alex. Thank you for keeping Joe sane and pushing him along. All right, Joe, we now have reached our final question that we ask everybody that comes on the Elevation Nation podcast. We've talked today a lot about your story, how you're a full-time inspirer, and how I know you're already changing the world, but you're going to continue to change the world and find your fulfillment. And Parker and I love this concept of mental fortitude. And for us, it's self-awareness, vision, and accountability that you need. But that's in our perspective what mental fortitude means. To you, Joe Rinaldi, what does mental fortitude mean?
You want me to sum it up? I have one tattoo, and I just got it a couple weeks ago, and it's to represent my favorite quote, which is by Christine Kane, and she once said, "Sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted." So to me, mental fortitude is having the planted perspective and knowing that even when things are tough, things will get better, and to trust that everything's happening for you, not to you. And I think that allows you to be resilient. And to me, resilience, of course, combined with awareness, vision, and accountability, is mental fortitude.
Trust the process. Read that on your website too. Love it. No, I mean, Joe, we have to go back and forth like on quotes because I'm a big quote guy. I have like a massive list of notes of quotes. And when Sam and we do a episode every Thursday with just you, Sam, and myself, and we always say one quote. So I guess I'll have to, obviously subscribe to the newsletter to get some more of your quotes, but I think we need to go just, text back and forth.
Of course, man.
But Joe, this was such a fun conversation. And I always acknowledge when we go over the time that we discussed because we said we were going to talk for 30 minutes and now we're at 53 minutes. Well, sorry, Elevation Nation, if you're still listening. Wait, I'm not apologizing because it was an awesome conversation, Joe. Seriously, you are absolutely killing it. You're really inspiring to Sam, to myself, and I'm sure to every single person that you meet, whether it's in the Starbucks, not the Dunkin' Donuts, whether it's at the gym, whether it's your wife or whomever you come in contact with. And I'm really happy that our paths came cross, and hopefully this is the start of something, we can always keep in touch and just one day, maybe see each other in person. So can't thank you enough for joining us.
I would absolutely love that. The pleasure was all mine, and I could tell this is the start of a great friendship. So thank you guys for having me, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds.
Love it. Until next week, Elevation Nation. Peace.